3 days after my sister's wedding, my mother left me a voicemail that changed everything. When I listened to it, she was crying so hard I could barely understand what she was saying. "Evelyn, please call me back. Please. We made a terrible mistake." I remember staring at my phone in complete silence. Because 3 days earlier, that same woman had looked me in the eyes and acted like I didn't belong in her family. At the time, I almost deleted the voicemail. I wish I had, because sitting on my kitchen table that morning was a yellow folder my family had spent years trying to keep hidden. A folder that contained a truth nobody wanted me to discover. A truth that would eventually destroy everything they had built their lives around. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 35 years old. And this is the story of how my family slowly erased me from their lives, only to panic when they realized I was the one person who could expose the secret they'd been hiding for years. Welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy emotional family stories filled with shocking betrayals, hidden secrets, and powerful endings, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future stories. And before we begin, tell me this. Have you ever felt like you were the only one making sacrifices in your family while everyone else took them for granted? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Growing up, my family always looked perfect from the outside. My father owned a respected construction company. My mother volunteered at every community event. My younger sister Chloe seemed to make friends everywhere she went. People loved us, or at least they thought they did. The reality was very different. Inside our home, there were always two daughters. The daughter everyone celebrated, and the daughter everyone depended on. Unfortunately, I was never the one they celebrated. That role belonged to Chloe. Chloe wasn't cruel. She wasn't spoiled in the obvious way people imagine. She simply grew up in a world where everyone solved problems before she ever noticed them. If Chloe forgot something, someone fixed it. If Chloe failed, someone protected her. If Chloe needed help, everyone rushed to provide it. Meanwhile, I learned very early that nobody was coming to rescue me. When I was 16, I got my first job. When Chloe was 16, my parents bought her a car. When I wanted spending money, I worked weekends. When Chloe wanted spending money, she asked Mom and Dad. Back then, I told myself it didn't matter. I was stronger because of it. More independent. More responsible. The problem was that responsibility slowly became expectation. By the time I turned 25, my family had stopped seeing my sacrifices as something special. They simply expected them. If a bill needed paying, I helped. If someone needed advice, I helped. If someone made a mistake, I helped. Every family emergency somehow landed on my shoulders. And every time it happened, I heard the same words. "We'll never forget this, Evelyn." The funny thing about gratitude is how quickly it disappears once people become comfortable receiving it. When my father's business struggled, I loaned him money. When my mother had unexpected medical expenses, I helped cover them. When Chloe quit another job and needed support, I stepped in. Not because anyone forced me, because they were family, and family was everything. At least that's what I believed. The older I got, the more successful I became. I built a consulting business from scratch. The first few years were brutal. There were nights I slept in my office, weekends I never took off, relationships I ruined because I was always working. But eventually the sacrifices paid off. By 35, I had a successful company, a beautiful home, and financial security. For the first time in my life, I felt proud of what I had built. Unfortunately, the more successful I became, the more useful I became to my family. Their calls became more frequent. Not because they wanted to spend time together. Not because they missed me. Because they needed something. Most of the time, I didn't even notice. When you spend years being useful, you stop questioning why people come to you. Then Chloe got engaged. Everything changed after that. I still remember the phone call. She sounded happier than I'd ever heard her. There was music in the background, people cheering, someone laughing loudly. "Evelyn!" I smiled immediately. "What's going on?" "He proposed." I nearly dropped my coffee. "What?" "He proposed." She started laughing again. "I said yes." For a moment, I forgot everything else. The years, the differences, the frustrations. I was simply happy for my little sister. I spent nearly an hour on the phone with her that night, listening to wedding ideas, venue dreams, guest lists, flower colors, everything. And when we finally hung up, I felt closer to her than I had in years. Looking back now, I think that was exactly why what happened afterward hurt so much. The first few weeks were normal. Everyone was excited. Everyone was talking about wedding plans. Family group messages became more active. Phone calls became more frequent. At first, it felt nice. Then small things started happening. Little things. The kind of things you don't notice immediately. One Saturday afternoon, I saw photos online from a venue tour. My parents were there. Chloe was there. Several cousins were there. I wasn't. When I asked Chloe about it, she laughed. It happened last minute. I accepted the explanation. A few weeks later, family members posted pictures from a planning dinner. Again, I wasn't there. Again, I was told it happened unexpectedly. Then there was another gathering, and another, and another. Every time there was an explanation. Every time there was a reason. Every time I convinced myself I was imagining things. Because the alternative was painful. The alternative suggested something I wasn't ready to believe. Months passed. The wedding became bigger, more expensive, more elaborate. The entire family seemed consumed by it. And somehow, the closer we got to the wedding day, the further away I felt from everyone. Conversations became awkward. Phone calls became shorter. Certain topics seemed to stop whenever I entered the room. At first, I ignored it. Then I started noticing patterns. And once I noticed them, I couldn't stop seeing them. One evening, I was scrolling through social media after work when a photo stopped me cold. It had been posted by one of Chloe's future in-laws. The picture showed a large family dinner. My parents, my sister, several relatives, members of the groom's family. Everyone smiling, everyone celebrating, everyone together. The caption underneath the photo was only 6 words long. But those 6 words stayed with me. Celebrating with the people who matter. I stared at the screen for a very long time. Not because I was offended, because something suddenly felt wrong, deeply wrong. The problem wasn't the photo. The problem wasn't even the caption. The problem was that nobody seemed surprised I wasn't there. Nobody asked where I was. Nobody mentioned my absence. It was as if everyone had quietly accepted that I simply wasn't part of the picture anymore. And for the first time, a question entered my mind that I couldn't shake. What if this wasn't accidental? What if nobody was forgetting me? What if I was being left out on purpose? I wish I could tell you I confronted my family immediately. I didn't. Instead, I spent the next few weeks trying to convince myself I was overthinking everything. Unfortunately, the truth has a way of revealing itself whether you're ready for it or not. And 2 weeks before the wedding, my cousin Rachel accidentally said something during lunch that changed everything. The moment those words left her mouth, I felt my stomach drop. Because if Rachel was telling the truth, then my family hadn't been forgetting me. They had been hiding something from me. Something important. Something connected to the wedding. And suddenly every strange conversation, every awkward silence, every missing invitation, started making terrifying sense. The only problem was, I still didn't know what the secret was. And deep down, I had a feeling I wasn't going to like the answer. 2 weeks before the wedding, I couldn't stop thinking about what Rachel had said. The problem wasn't that she'd sounded nervous. The problem was that she'd sounded surprised. Surprised that I didn't already know. I spent the entire drive home replaying the conversation in my head. Every word, every pause, every expression, trying to figure out exactly what I'd missed. Rachel and I had met for lunch at a small cafe halfway between our towns. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, at least not at first. We talked about work, life, family, the wedding, normal things. Then she casually asked a question that changed everything. So, have you decided what you're going to do? I frowned. What do you mean? Rachel looked confused. The wedding. I laughed. What about it? She blinked. Then her smile disappeared. And for the first time during the entire lunch, she looked uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Wait. She slowly put down her coffee. You really don't know? The moment she said that, my stomach tightened. Because those 4 words almost never lead to anything good. What don't I know? Rachel immediately looked away. A mistake. A very obvious mistake. People don't avoid eye contact when discussing harmless things. They do it when they've accidentally said something they shouldn't. Rachel, she sighed. It's probably nothing. I hated that answer. Nothing is rarely nothing, especially inside families. Rachel. For a few seconds she remained silent. Then she shook her head. Forget I said anything. The conversation moved on after that, at least officially. But mentally, I never left it, because something about her reaction felt wrong. Not strange, not awkward, wrong. As if she'd assumed I already knew something important, something everyone else already knew, something I didn't. For the next few days, I found myself paying closer attention than ever before. And once I started paying attention, I noticed things I couldn't ignore. My mother stopped mentioning wedding plans completely. Not reduced. Stopped. Every conversation suddenly became about something else. The weather, neighbors, television shows, anything except the wedding. My father did the same thing. Whenever I brought it up, he changed the subject. Quickly, almost desperately. The behavior felt unnatural, like 2 people trying very hard not to make a mistake. Then there was Chloe. She became harder and harder to reach. Calls went unanswered. Messages received short replies. Sometimes no replies at all. For someone planning the biggest day of her life, she seemed strangely uninterested in discussing it with her own sister. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. One evening I called her again, straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. 3 attempts. No answer. 20 minutes later, a text arrived. Busy. Talk later. That was it. No explanation. No apology. Nothing. I stared at the message. Then I did something I rarely do. I got angry. Not explosive anger. The quiet kind. The kind that grows slowly. The kind that comes from realizing you've been making excuses for people who aren't making any effort for you. Because suddenly I wasn't looking at one ignored call. I was looking at months of behavior, months of exclusion, months of awkward conversations, months of missing information, and none of it felt accidental anymore. The following weekend, I drove to my parents' house. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. Part of me hoped seeing everyone in person would clear things up. Instead, it made everything worse. When I arrived, my mother's car was in the driveway. My father's truck was there, several other vehicles too. The house was clearly full of people. I smiled. Maybe everyone was together. Maybe I'd finally get answers. I walked toward the front door, then stopped. Because I heard voices inside. Lots of voices. Family voices. Laughter. Conversation. Music. A gathering. A gathering nobody had mentioned to me. I stood there staring at the door, trying to understand, trying to find a reasonable explanation. Eventually, I rang the bell. The laughter inside stopped. Instantly. Every single voice. Gone. Silence. Complete silence. The kind of silence that only happens when people weren't expecting someone to arrive. My stomach dropped. A few seconds later, the door opened. My mother stood there. And the expression on her face wasn't happiness. It wasn't surprise either. It was panic. For a moment, she simply stared at me. Evelyn? I forced a smile. Hi. Her eyes moved behind me, then over my shoulder, then toward the driveway, almost as if she expected someone else to be standing there. What are you doing here? The question caught me off guard, because it wasn't, how are you? Or, it's good to see you. Or even, come inside. Instead, the first thing she wanted to know was why I was there. I thought I'd visit. She didn't respond immediately. That frightened me. Normal people don't need time to process family visits. Finally, she stepped aside. Slowly. Too slowly. Come in. The moment I entered the house, every conversation stopped again. Every single one. My cousins, my aunt, my uncle. Everyone looked at me. And then, almost simultaneously, everyone looked away. The room felt wrong. The atmosphere felt wrong. Nobody seemed relaxed. Nobody seemed comfortable. Nobody seemed happy to see me. I glanced around the room. Wedding magazines, venue brochures, guest lists, planning documents. The entire family had clearly been discussing the wedding. Without me. Again. And suddenly Rachel's reaction at lunch came rushing back into my mind. You really don't know? No. I didn't know. But everyone else did. That much was becoming painfully obvious. The rest of the evening felt like a performance. People forced smiles, forced conversations, forced laughter. Nobody relaxed until I left, and that realization hurt more than I wanted to admit, because for the first time in my life, I felt like an outsider in my own family. That night, lying awake in bed, I made a decision. I was done pretending everything was normal. I was done accepting vague answers. I was done making excuses. The next time I spoke to Chloe, I was going to ask direct questions, and I wasn't stopping until I got direct answers. At least, that was the plan. What I didn't know was that 3 days later, something would happen that made all my questions seem insignificant. Because 3 days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, no note, no explanation, just my name written across the front. And inside that envelope was a single photograph. The moment I saw it, every hair on the back of my neck stood up. Because the people in that photograph weren't strangers. They were my family. And based on what I was looking at, someone had been lying to me for a very long time. The photograph sat on my kitchen table for almost an hour before I touched it again. Not because I was afraid of what it showed, because I was afraid of what it might mean. The envelope had arrived without a return address. No letter, no explanation, no clue who had sent it. Just a single photograph. At first glance, it looked harmless. A family gathering, people smiling, standing together outside a large lakeside property. The kind of picture families take during celebrations. But the longer I stared at it, the stranger it became. Because the date printed in the corner caught my attention. It had been taken 7 months earlier. 7 months. Long before Chloe's engagement. Long before the wedding planning started. And yet, everyone in my family was there. My parents, my sister, several relatives, even people connected to Michael's family. Everyone. Everyone except me. I turned the photograph over. Nothing. No writing. No explanation. Just blank paper. The more I looked at it, the more questions I had. Why send this? Why now? And why anonymously? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photograph. And every time I looked at it again, the same thought returned. Someone wanted me to see this. The question was why. The following morning, I called Rachel. If anyone knew what was happening, it was probably her. The moment she answered, I knew something was wrong. Her voice sounded nervous, almost guilty. Hey. Rachel. Silence. A long silence. Then, what's wrong? That answer alone told me everything. She already knew something was wrong. I got something in the mail. More silence. Then, what kind of something? I looked down at the photograph. A photograph. The silence that followed lasted nearly 5 seconds. Way too long. Rachel, she sighed, and suddenly I knew. She recognized it. What aren't you telling me? I can't. My stomach tightened. Can't. Not won't. Can't. That was different. Because won't means choice. Can't means fear. Rachel, what is happening? I shouldn't be talking about this. My pulse started racing. Talking about what? Nobody talks like that unless there's actually something to hide. Then Rachel said something that made my entire body go cold. Evelyn, maybe you should ask your parents. Maybe. Not definitely. Not directly. Maybe. The kind of answer people give when they're terrified of saying too much. And suddenly I realized something. Rachel wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting someone else. The call ended a few minutes later, but it didn't matter, because by then I'd already made up my mind. I was done asking indirect questions. I was done pretending not to notice. And I was definitely done waiting for people to tell me the truth. That evening, I drove straight to my parents' house. For the second time in 2 weeks. This time, I wasn't there for a friendly visit. This time, I wanted answers. The drive felt longer than usual. Every mile gave me more time to think, more time to wonder, more time to imagine possibilities. None of them were good. When I finally pulled into the driveway, both of my parents' vehicles were there. Lights glowed through the windows. They were home. Good. Because I wasn't leaving without answers. I walked to the front door and knocked. My mother opened it. The moment she saw me, her smile disappeared. Not faded, disappeared. Instantly. That reaction alone told me everything I needed to know. She was expecting trouble. Evelyn. I held up the photograph. Her face lost all color. For a second, she looked like she might collapse, and that terrified me. Because innocent people don't react like that. What is this? Her eyes locked onto the photograph, then immediately looked away. The same way everyone had been looking away for months. The same way guilty people avoid evidence. I don't know. A lie. A terrible lie. And we both knew it. Mom. I said I don't know. Her voice cracked. Not anger. Fear. Real fear. The kind I'd never heard from her before. A moment later, my father appeared behind her. Then he saw the photograph, and his reaction was even worse. He froze. Completely. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then my father quietly said, "Where did you get that?" Not, "What photograph?" Not, "I've never seen that before." Instead, "Where did you get that?" A question that confirmed one thing. He knew exactly what it was. I felt my heart pounding. "What is it?" Neither of them answered. My father rubbed his forehead. My mother looked like she was trying not to cry. And suddenly I wasn't angry anymore. I was scared. Because whatever secret they were hiding, it was clearly bigger than I had imagined. Then my father said something that made no sense at all. It should have stayed buried. Buried. The word echoed inside my head. Buried. What exactly was buried? A secret? A mistake? A lie? And why did everyone act like this photograph was dangerous? I looked back down at the picture, studying every face, every detail, every background object. And then, for the first time, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. Something hidden near the edge of the photograph. A sign. A small wooden sign attached to a fence. I stepped closer to the light, trying to read it. The lettering was faded, partially blocked, but still visible. And when I finally made out the words, my breath caught in my throat, because I recognized that name. Immediately. It wasn't just any property. It wasn't just any location. It was connected to my grandfather. The same grandfather whose name nobody in my family ever talked about anymore. The same grandfather whose estate had supposedly been settled years ago. The same grandfather who died when I was 24. Suddenly, my father's words made sense. It should have stayed buried. Whatever this secret was, It wasn't connected to Chloe's wedding. The wedding was only the cover. The real secret went back years, maybe more than a decade. And judging by the fear on my parents' faces, they were terrified I was finally getting close to the truth. For the first time since this started, I felt certain of one thing. The answers weren't in the wedding plans. They weren't in the guest list. And they definitely weren't in Chloe's marriage. The answers were hidden somewhere in my grandfather's past. And somehow, that past was connected to me. What I didn't know yet was that less than 24 hours later, I would find something hidden inside an old storage room. Something that would explain why my family spent years excluding me. Something that would explain the photograph. And something that would lead me directly to the yellow folder sitting on my kitchen table 3 days after the wedding. The same folder my mother would later beg me not to open. The moment my father said the answers were connected to my grandfather, everything changed. Until then, I'd believed the wedding was the center of the story. Now I wasn't so sure. Because for the first time, I realized something important. The wedding wasn't the cause. It was the distraction. Whatever my family was hiding had started years earlier. Long before Chloe got engaged. Long before anyone started planning a ceremony. And somehow, I was at the center of it. I drove home that night with more questions than answers. My parents refused to explain anything. The photograph remained a mystery, and my grandfather's name kept echoing inside my head. The strange thing was that my grandfather and I had always been close, much closer than he was with anyone else in the family. When I was younger, I spent nearly every weekend at his property, a beautiful lakeside estate about 40 minutes outside town. Back then it felt magical. Fishing in the mornings, long walks through the woods, stories beside the fireplace. Some of my happiest memories happened there. Then he died, and almost overnight, the place disappeared from family conversations. The property was sold, the estate was settled, everyone moved on, or at least that was what I'd been told. The next morning I called in sick to work. For the first time in years, I couldn't focus, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except replay everything that had happened. The photograph, Rachel's reaction, my mother's fear, my father's panic. The more I thought about it, the more one question kept returning. Why had someone mailed me that picture now? After all these years, why now? Then another thought hit me. What if the answer wasn't in the photograph? What if the answer was where the photograph had been taken? That afternoon, I drove to a storage facility on the edge of town, a place my parents had rented for years. I knew about it because I'd helped pay for it after my grandfather died. Back then, my father claimed he needed extra space for family belongings. At the time, I never questioned it. Now I was questioning everything. The manager recognized me immediately. Our family had used the facility for years. After a brief conversation, he pointed me toward the correct building. Walking down that long hallway felt strangely unsettling, almost like stepping backward through time. Dust covered the floor. The air smelled old, forgotten, neglected. Exactly how family secrets survive. When I reached the storage unit, my pulse started racing. The lock looked untouched. The metal door looked exactly as I remembered. For several seconds, I simply stood there, thinking, wondering if I was making a mistake, wondering if I even wanted answers. Because sometimes the truth destroys things that can never be rebuilt. Eventually, I took a deep breath and opened the door. Inside were dozens of boxes, old furniture, photo albums, documents, family belongings, years of forgotten history. At first, nothing seemed unusual. I spent nearly 2 hours sorting through boxes. Most contained exactly what you'd expect: holiday decorations, old clothes, kitchen items, photographs. Nothing important, nothing suspicious, nothing that explained the fear I'd seen in my parents' eyes. Then I found a box near the back wall. Unlike the others, it wasn't covered in dust. That immediately caught my attention. Everything else looked untouched. This box didn't. Someone had accessed it recently, very recently. My hands started shaking as I pulled it closer. Inside were old notebooks, receipts, property records, letters, and then I found something that made my stomach drop. A thick red notebook. I froze, because I recognized it immediately. It belonged to my grandfather. I hadn't seen it since the year he died. As a child, I remembered him carrying it everywhere, writing in it constantly, protecting it almost obsessively. Back then, I thought it was just another notebook. Now I wasn't so sure. Slowly, I opened it. The first few pages contained ordinary notes, appointments, expenses, phone numbers, nothing unusual. Then I turned another page, and another, and another. The deeper I went, the stranger things became. There were names, dates, property references, financial records, personal observations, detailed notes about family decisions, including decisions involving my parents. My heart started pounding, because these weren't random notes. This was a record, a very detailed record, almost like my grandfather had been documenting something he didn't trust people to remember honestly. Then I reached a page that made my blood run cold. At the top was a date, 11 years earlier. Beneath it were 7 handwritten words. If anything happens, Evelyn deserves the truth. I read the sentence 3 times, then 4, then 5. My grandfather's handwriting was unmistakable. The words were real. And suddenly I understood why my parents looked terrified. Because whatever truth he was talking about, they already knew it. The notebook continued for dozens more pages. Each page raised new questions. Each page made me more uncomfortable. And then I found an envelope tucked inside the back cover. Yellow, aged, sealed. My name was written across the front. Not printed, handwritten, in my grandfather's handwriting. For a moment I couldn't breathe, because this wasn't possible. If my grandfather left something for me, why had nobody ever told me? Why was it hidden in a storage unit? Why was it buried inside a notebook? Slowly, I turned the envelope over. The seal had never been broken, not once, which meant nobody had opened it. Or at least nobody wanted me to know they had. My hands were trembling now. Part of me wanted to open it immediately. Another part was terrified, because deep down, I knew something. The answers I'd been searching for were inside. The wedding, the photograph, my family's behavior, the years of exclusion, everything. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, as if 11 years of secrets were trapped inside. I stared at it for several seconds, then finally slipped a finger beneath the seal. And the moment it opened, a folded legal document slid into my lap. One glance at the heading was enough to make my entire world stop. Because the first words on the page were, "Last Amendment to the Estate of William Harper," my grandfather. And beneath that heading was my name. The legal document slipped from my hands and landed on the concrete floor. For several seconds I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. My name was printed across the page. Not Chloe's, not my parents', mine. I slowly picked up the document, then started reading. The first paragraph looked normal. Legal language, estate terminology, references to my grandfather's assets. Nothing unusual. Then I reached the amendment itself, and everything changed. Because according to the document, my grandfather had altered his estate 6 months before his death. A change nobody had ever told me about. A change that directly affected me. My hands started shaking. The document stated that if certain conditions were met, ownership of a specific property would transfer to me. Not jointly, not partially, entirely. At first, I thought I was misunderstanding, so I read it again. Then again. Then again. The wording never changed. The property mentioned in the amendment was the same lakeside estate from the photograph. The same property I'd been told was sold years ago. The same property everyone claimed no longer belonged to our family. But according to this document, that wasn't true. Not even close. My pulse pounded inside my ears, because if the document was legitimate, someone had lied, for years, a very long time. and judging by the panic I'd seen in my parents' faces, they knew exactly what the document said. I kept reading. Near the bottom was another note attached to the amendment, a handwritten statement from my grandfather. Not legally required, personal, direct, and clearly intended for me. The note read, "Evelyn, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong. I hope that isn't the case. But if it is, I need you to know that some people will choose convenience over truth. Even family, especially family. Trust the records, trust the facts, and never let anyone convince you that you don't belong." My eyes filled with tears, not because of the property, not because of the money, because suddenly I remembered something. The last conversation I ever had with my grandfather, 11 years earlier. I had been 24. He was sitting beside the fireplace at the lake house, holding the same red notebook, the same notebook now sitting beside me. At the time, he'd said something strange, something I never understood. "Evelyn, one day you're going to learn who people really are." Back then, I thought he was talking about life, or business, or growing up. Now I wasn't so sure, because suddenly it felt like he'd been trying to warn me. The sound of a car door slamming outside snapped me back to reality. I froze. Someone was here. A moment later, footsteps echoed through the hallway. Fast footsteps. Urgent footsteps. Coming directly toward the storage unit. My stomach dropped. Nobody should have known I was here. Nobody. The footsteps got closer, then stopped. A shadow appeared outside the unit. For one terrifying second, I thought it might be my parents, or Chloe, or someone connected to the secret. Then a familiar voice spoke. "Evelyn?" "Rachel." I exhaled, immediately relieved. But that relief lasted only a second, because Rachel looked terrified, genuinely terrified. The moment she saw the document in my hands, she closed her eyes, almost as if she'd hoped she was too late. "You found it." Not a question, a statement. "You knew?" Rachel didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. "You knew." She slowly nodded. I felt anger rising inside me. Weeks of confusion, months of exclusion, years of being treated like an outsider, all crashing together at once. "Rachel, what is happening?" She looked around nervously, then stepped inside and lowered her voice. "Evelyn, you need to leave." "What?" "You need to leave right now." The fear in her voice sent chills through me. "Why?" Rachel looked directly at the amendment, then at the red notebook, then back at me, and finally said the words I'd been dreading. "Because if your parents find out you have those—" My pulse quickened. "Find out what?" Rachel swallowed hard. "The amendment. The notebook. The records." I stared at her. "Why?" For several seconds she couldn't answer. Then finally, "Because the wedding was never about Chloe." Everything inside me stopped. "What?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "The wedding wasn't the reason they excluded you." My heart pounded. Then what was? Rachel took a deep breath and spoke the sentence that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. "They were trying to keep you away from someone. Away from someone. Not something. Someone." The words hit me like a truck, because suddenly every strange event started rearranging itself inside my mind. The missing invitations, the awkward conversations, the panic, the fear, the wedding, the photograph, the lies. None of it was about keeping a secret hidden. It was about keeping two people apart. Me and someone else. The problem was, I had absolutely no idea who. Rachel wiped her eyes, then reached into her purse. When she pulled out a folded photograph, my blood ran cold, because I immediately recognized the person standing beside my grandfather, a person I'd never seen before, a person who looked disturbingly familiar. Too familiar. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The eyes, the smile, the face. I felt sick. because the stranger looked exactly like someone in my family. And in that moment, I realized the truth was far bigger than property, far bigger than inheritance, far bigger than the wedding. The secret my family had spent years protecting wasn't about money, it was about a person. And judging by the look on Rachel's face, the next answer was going to change my life forever.